Part 1. Picking an MM should not always be your priority in the draft. And I'm not saying marksmen are bad. They're still one of the most important sources of consistent damage in the game. The problem is the mindset that says, gold lane is open, so we need an MM. No, you should be looking at the entire draft before deciding what you're going to pick. Because sometimes your team genuinely needs an MM, but sometimes your team already has enough damage, and what you're actually missing is something else. Maybe you don't have enough frontline. Maybe your team has weak initiation. Maybe you don't have enough reliable CC. Maybe nobody can protect your backline. And if that's the case, picking another damage dealer doesn't automatically make your team stronger. A team isn't strong just because every hero can deal damage. You need heroes that actually work together. You need someone who can create space, someone who can start fights, someone who can control the enemy, someone who can protect your damage dealers. And then, of course, you need the damage to finish the fight. That's where the MM comes in. So the point isn't don't pick MM. The point is, don't pick MM automatically. Your pick should depend on what your team already has, what the enemy has, and how the game is likely to be played. Because if you're picking the same MM every game without even looking at the draft, you're not really making a decision. You're just following a habit, and that habit can easily turn a good draft into a bad one. Part 2. The first thing you should look at is your own team. Before thinking about which MM you're going to pick, look at what your teammates have already chosen. Let's say your jungler is a high damage assassin. Your EXP laner also has strong damage. Your mage has good burst and can contribute heavily in team fights. Now you reach gold lane. A lot of players immediately think, we already have damage, but we still need an MM. But do you? Look at the composition again. Maybe you already have more than enough damage. What you might actually be missing is a frontline. Maybe you need someone who can initiate fights. Maybe you need reliable crowd control. Maybe you need someone who can protect your backline when the enemy starts diving. This is where people confuse having strong heroes with having a strong team composition. 5 individually powerful heroes don't automatically make a good team. They need to complement each other. Think about what happens when the first team fight starts. Who goes in first? Who creates space? Who controls the enemy? Who protects your damage dealers? Who follows up on the engage? And who deals the consistent damage once the fight starts? If your team already has plenty of damage but has no answer for the other questions, picking another MM isn't necessarily fixing anything. You might just be adding more damage to a composition that can't properly use it. So before you lock your MM, don't just look at the gold lane. Look at the 4 heroes standing beside you. Your job isn't to make your own hero stronger. Your job is to make the whole composition stronger. Part 3. The next thing you need to look at is the enemy draft. This is where a lot of players completely ignore what's happening. They decide what they're going to play before they've even seen the enemy. They have their comfort MM ready, and unless it's banned, they're picking it. Then the enemy starts showing heroes that can dive the backline, and they still lock the MM. Now you've basically chosen a hero without asking whether that hero can actually function against the enemy composition. Because an MM doesn't just need damage. They need space. They need time to farm. They need a safe position during team fights. And they need enough time to continuously attack without getting forced out. If the enemy has multiple ways to reach your backline, all of that becomes harder. You might spend half the team fight trying to avoid getting caught instead of dealing damage. And yes, people will always say, just position better. Obviously, good positioning matters. But positioning isn't going to magically remove every enemy engage. If multiple heroes can jump onto you, lock you down, or force you away from the fight, you're naturally going to have a harder time doing damage. That's why you need to ask yourself, how easily can the enemy reach me? And then, does my team actually have a way to stop them? If the enemy has a lot of backline pressure and your team has almost no protection, you shouldn't blindly pick your MM just because you're comfortable with it. The draft is already telling you what kind of game you're going to have. You just need to actually listen to it. Part 4. And this brings us to one of the biggest things people forget about marksmen. An MM needs space to function. People usually focus on gold, and obviously, gold is important. But having a lot of items doesn't mean much if you can't actually use them. Think about a normal late-game team fight. Your roamer starts the fight. Your front line takes the initial pressure. Your team keeps the enemy away from you. Now you have room to attack. You can stay behind your team, hit the front line, switch targets when someone gets low, and continuously deal damage. That's when an MM becomes extremely strong. But now imagine the opposite. Your team doesn't have enough front line. Your roamer can't protect you. Your EXP laner dives into the enemy backline. Your jungler is looking for their own target. And suddenly the enemy has a clear path straight toward you. Now you're forced to play extremely far back. You can't step forward. You can't safely attack. And every time you show yourself, there's a chance you're getting caught. At that point, your damage on paper doesn't really matter. You could have 3 or 4 items, but if you're spending the entire fight running away, you're not getting the value those items are supposed to provide. This is why the rest of your team matters so much when you're picking an MM. You should be asking, who is creating space for me? Who is stopping the enemy from reaching me? Can I actually stand and deal damage during a team fight? If the answer to all 3 is basically no, then maybe your team needs to approach the draft differently. Because sometimes the problem isn't that you're MM. The problem is that the team composition isn't giving the MM a chance to play the game. Part 5. Another problem is comfort pick mentality. Having a main MM is completely fine. If you played hundreds of games on a hero, obviously you're going to understand that hero better than something you've barely touched. You know its damage. You know its limits. You know which fights you can take. You know when you need to back off. But there's a big difference between saying, "This is my best hero," and saying, "This is the best hero for every game." Those are not the same thing. Your favorite MM can be an amazing pick in one draft and a terrible pick in another. And if you're locking it every single game regardless of the matchup, you're making the game harder before it even starts. You don't need to master every marksman in the game, but you should have some options. Have a safer pick. Have something you can use when the enemy has heavy dive. Have something that works better when your team already has damage. And understand which situations your main struggles against. That's what actual flexibility looks like. Because if your favorite hero gets banned and suddenly you have no idea what to pick, you're not really adapting to the draft. You're just hoping your comfort hero carries you. And rank doesn't always give you that luxury. Sometimes your favorite hero is available, but the draft is telling you not to pick it. That's when you need to trust your understanding of the game instead of blindly trusting your comfort zone. Being good at an MM is valuable, but knowing when not to pick it is also part of being good at the role. Part 6. Now let's talk about the biggest argument people use for prioritizing MM. But we need late game damage. And honestly, that's a fair point. A lot of marksmen become extremely valuable as the game goes on. Once they have their important items, their sustained DPS can completely change a team fight. They can shred objectives, punish frontliners, destroy towers, and become one of the biggest win conditions on the map. So yes, having an MM can give your team a very strong late game option. But there's one problem. You still have to reach the late game. You can't just say, "Don't worry, we'll scale," and then ignore everything happening before that. You still need to survive your lane. You need to farm consistently. You need to contest objectives. You need to defend your towers. And most importantly, you need to avoid giving the enemy such a massive lead where scaling doesn't even matter anymore. This is why I don't like using late game scaling as the only reason to pick an MM. You need to ask whether your team can actually create a game where that scaling becomes useful. If the enemy has strong early pressure and multiple ways to punish your backline, reaching your power spike might be much harder. On the other hand, if your team can protect you, control the map, and give you enough time to farm, then that late game scaling becomes a real advantage. So don't just ask, how strong is this MM in the late game? Ask, can we realistically reach that late game in a good position? Because having a strong late game win condition is great. But a win condition only matters if your team can actually play for it. Part 7, the ending. And this is really what the whole point comes down to. I'm not saying you should stop playing MM. I'm not saying marksmen are weak. And I'm definitely not saying every team should avoid having it. The point is that MM shouldn't be an automatic priority. Before you lock your hero, look at both drafts. Ask yourself, what does my team already have? What are we missing? How easily can the enemy reach me? Who's going to create space for me? And most importantly, does picking this MM actually make our team stronger? If the answer is yes, then pick it. If your team needs sustained damage, pick it. If you have enough protection and space to play your hero, pick it. But if the draft is clearly asking for something else, don't force an MM just because you're playing gold lane. Because being good at gold lane isn't just about knowing how to farm or knowing your hero's combos. It's also about knowing when your hero is actually the right pick. Sometimes your favorite MM is the perfect choice. Sometimes another hero gives your team a much better chance of winning. And being able to recognize that difference is what makes you a better player. So next time you're in draft and gold lane is available, don't immediately think, we need an MM. Think, what does this game need? If the answer is MM, lock it and play around your win condition. But if the answer is something else, adapt. Because at the